one thing we do know for certain is AI is the worst it's ever going to be right now. And when somebody's ready for a full exit, we really kind of work with them on the proper preparation to get to a premium valuation. And that's really where, we tend to shine, is helping companies better prepare for a transaction that they're going to be truly proud of. It's important to continue to personally develop along the way, because in the end, that's what makes them all worthwhile. Because as we create more value in ourselves, that's going to translate to our business. We're going to bring more value to our stakeholders, like our employees, et cetera, even our customers, vendors, suppliers. And so that self-education is really important.
Hey there, and welcome to From the Ground Up Show, the show where we encourage and inspire the next generation of free-thinking leaders by telling the stories of those that have been there, done that, and are still getting it done, building a life that they love with their hearts, their hands, and their hustle. I'm your host, Erick Loden. If you guys get anything at all out of the show, please do me a favor, like, share, follow, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, on YouTube, on social media. Send this show to a friend that might appreciate it or benefit from it. That's the best thing you guys can do to support the show. We don't have the backing of a major network or a big platform. So you guys are the best tool that we have to get the content out there and help more business owners, more leaders become the best that they can be. Make sure you check out our merch store. We have all the typical things: hats, shirts, sweatshirts, coffee cups, and then there's a couple really unique things in there that you probably won't find at most merch stores. So check that out. It's shop.fromthegroundupshow.com. Today, I am pretty excited. I have Matt Andersen joining me, and Matt's background is a little bit different than our typical guest. He specializes in mergers and acquisitions, capitalization, and growing businesses kind of for the purpose of exiting. So Matt is a best-selling author, a two-time best-selling author. He's an international speaker. He's closed over $5 billion worth of M&A transactions and works with many businesses, large and small, to increase enterprise value, prepare for that exit event, and then walking them through that. So Matt should be a wealth of knowledge of how we can best grow our businesses, how we can capitalize our businesses, and when the time comes, how we can prepare for an exit. So Matt, thanks for joining us.
Oh, glad to be here. Thanks for having me. I'd also say I actually have had real operating experience. Part of that collective history was I ran a division of a publicly traded company, and then I'm fortunate to be an operator for my own business. So yeah, I've kind of full cycle, so to speak.
Awesome. Well, I will be excited to hear about that, and we might pick your brain a little bit of leadership and insight from your time running your own business as well. So we like to start every show kind of going back to the beginning and learning about the life that got you to where you are. So going clear back to the beginning, do you mind telling us a little bit about your childhood and kind of early education?
Yeah, happy to do it. So I was kind of born and raised just outside Chicago, so the western suburbs, and spent kind of my early years there. For those that are Chicago Blackhawks fan, if they saw Coach Q's house getting TP'd when the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cups, that was the childhood house I grew up in. So it was a great upbringing, great area we lived on a pond. We had a summer place kind of out in the kind of more rural areas of Illinois. So really enjoyed a lot of kind of both things that the city of Chicago had to offer, suburban growing up, and then kind of more rural areas where I kind of found some of my passions in the sense of outside of work, things that I did when I was younger, I still enjoy today, riding horses and things of that nature. Fishing's a big passion of mine still to this day. And so, yeah, it was a pretty well-rounded upbringing. I played both golf and lacrosse on our high school team, and I showed horses actually competitively through kind of my early 20s. But that's kind of where life started for me, even though I now live just outside of Austin, Texas.
That's quite a diverse background. There's probably not a lot of Chicago kids that grew up showing horses.
So my aunt on my mom's side was very into it. And, having spent a lot of time kind of outside of the city, probably 2.5 hours outside of Chicago. And when you get kind of that far, I mean, Illinois is fairly rural outside of just the immediate Chicagoland area. And so there was a lot of kind of that sort of activity going on. But yeah, just a little further outside of the city. And then when I was going, when we were in the suburbs, kind of, for school and things of that nature, there was several riding stables nearby, and so I had the chance to kind of continue.
That's a great hobby, and really cool that you can share that with multiple generations there. Are you in the construction industry and super excited about the services you get from your material supplier? Did your material supplier pay to take you on an all-inclusive vacation this year? Do you always have what you need, when and where you need it? If you answer no to any of those questions, make sure you check out MacArthur. MacArthurCo.com. Give them a call and find the branch nearest you. Top materials, the best prices, and only the best service. And ask them about their customer incentive trips. So, coming out of kind of your primary education, did you pursue a college education? What did education look like for you?
Yeah, I did. Although, because of the first part of my journey, I really wanted to go to school to become a veterinarian. So, about a year in, and by the way, I share this I do a lot of university talks, and sometimes the attendees are freshmen and sophomore. And so I share with them, if you're not 100% sure of what you want to do, use my story as an example or case study for how things can work out. It's okay not to know exactly what you want to do at 18 or 19 years old. So wanted to be a veterinarian. After a year of that, though, I realized 7 more years of school and probably accumulating some debt, and then maybe working for not a lot of money for a couple of years after graduation wasn't probably the thing I wanted to do. And so what I did was I kind of went on a little bit of a soul searching journey, and I attended every talk that went on at my university. If there was an outside speaker coming in, I went to it. I did a series of internships. The last internship I had before I picked a career in finance was a somewhat interesting one. I did an internship for a CPA firm, and it was amazing. It was spring semester, and there was just a lot of, great kind of camaraderie around the office, I would say, in January. And then sometime around April 1st, I noticed a little bit of a dark haze that developed around the office. For those that may not be familiar, that's tax time, which for CPAs is highly stressful, especially back then when there was a lot of manual items going on. And so I really enjoyed the internship, but I kind of came to grips that this may not be for me altogether. And it was after tax season, there was an office mixer, and it was at that office mixer where I'd met somebody who was in the investment universe, if you will, worked for a very large U.S. investment bank and investment firm. And so I ended up doing an internship with that organization. And from there, my career was kind of set forward. I started my career kind of in institutional investments and kind of went on from there. But it was that kind of soul searching experience that really kind of led to the career path. I would say out of all the talks that I went to, from having outside speakers come to my university that I attended, there's one speaker in particular. It was a gentleman who had scaled a business from kind of a couple million to 100 million. And again, this is, 100 million. This is back in the day, right? So this was like when 100 million was real money. Not inflation adjusted. Inflation adjusted, that's probably $250 million today. So he'd scaled this business up. And one of the things that he said, and it stuck with me to this day, was about journaling. And that's something I took away from that talk, that to this day, I'm a very active journaler. But I'm really thankful for the 2 experiences, I'd say, that had a profound impact on my life. Number one was that talk that I heard. There was more to it that I took away, but that talk that I heard about journaling, and then the internship with the CPA firm that led to the internship with the investment bank and investment firm. Those were life-changing experiences for me.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's awesome that you can kind of roll back and have a few pivotal moments that made such a high impact. That's cool to be able to incorporate that into your story.
Yeah, for sure. And so that's one thing, like whenever I'm talking with folks at universities, always encouraging them to, try the internships, listen to the guest speakers, take notes. I've got a talk that I share with universities that it's really called the 11 Tips for Finding Success in a Career in Finance. Mostly I give that talk to university associations that are student-led. I've given a couple that are organizationally led by the university, but most are going to be like student-led organizations. But it's one of the things I share with them is about journaling and how important it is to kind of track progress over time. And again, that goes back to when I was 19. So it was yesterday, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's a practice I feel like I could have benefited from, or maybe should still. It was something I did not do well, but I find it very helpful sometimes to look back and see where you came from and what you've come through as you're facing the next set of problems. It's very helpful.
Yeah, I think it's super important. And the one thing I share with somebody as they close out a journal is to read back through it and to take forward the 10 best ideas from your previous journal into your new journal.
Oh, yeah.
It allows you to kind of give closure to the old journal, but it also brings forward your best ideas and your best to-dos and the most ambitious things that you want to accomplish forward into your new journal.
Oh,
So
that's
that's
cool.
something I do religiously. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, as somebody that has some college and is kind of in the more white collar space, you brought up a couple things there. You didn't want to do 7 years of school and take on the additional debt and postpone your working career that much further. Based on your own experience and kind of the way you look at the world now, what advice would you have for a young person that's coming to the end of their high school career, or maybe just rethinking things? Would you still push them into some college, no college? Does it depend on where they want to go, what they want to do? What are your thoughts on education?
Yeah, and look, everyone's path is so unique. I think especially today, it's very difficult to give a probably a one size fits all. But let me share just a few maybe overarching thought processes that I might have today if somebody were to ask me. And I guess number one is if somebody has the opportunity to maybe scholastically, financially, they're able to go to university. I definitely would not discourage them from that,
Hmm.
but I would prepare them well in the sense that it's going to be probably a great experience, but they need to supplement that kind of core curriculum with what I would call more alternative education sources. So kind of getting a better understanding of, human psychology, probably getting a better understanding of AI, probably getting more time and focus on communications, both verbally and non-verbally. I think those things are going to be really, really important, especially in an age where you can kind of belly up to a computer and there's a lot of questions that you can now ask things like ChatGPT, Claude, and you can get some unbelievable responses to. And so I think in that sense, if you're going to go when you're going to go, it's important to make sure you're supplementing maybe a traditional education with other sources. It's also really important to kind of, again, if there's speakers coming, go. If there's internship opportunities, take them. Those extra add-ons around things that you can create yourself, things that are brought to you through your university that you can be a part of, and then things that you seek outside of the university through kind of internship programs. That combination is what will make that a very productive 4 years. I think for somebody who's maybe just, kind of struggling to get that university fit, or there's going to be a lot of debt associated with the university experience, I probably would encourage to give some greater thought to how they go about it. And I'm not suggesting that they just bypass it altogether, but maybe be more creative. There's a lot of, great colleges out there that aren't super expensive. There's a lot of things that you can supplement with online classes in summer that are very low cost to speed up the process to go from starting to graduation without kind of racking up large amounts of debt, kind of setting you back before you even get started. And then for somebody who it's just not a pure option for, I would just really be thoughtful about what it is that they're going to go for. So if you're going from high school directly in the workforce, I do think kind of really preparing yourself. There's honestly never been an easier time to self-educate through alternative education programs. And so really being thoughtful about that, whether it's if you're going to go into welding, I mean, you don't have to wait 15 years to be, skilled at welding. There's things that you can do to supplement your knowledge base. If you want to go to work in an office setting, there's things that you can do from an AI perspective to really, increase your skills, or YouTube videos or podcasts like this one to really kind of increase your working knowledge. And then if you wanted to start your own business in any one of these stretches, I would just say it's never been easier to start a business, but it's probably been it's going to be getting tougher and tougher to succeed. And I do think kind of one of the cores around this, whether you're going to go from high school straight in the workforce, or if you're going to go from high school into a traditional 4-year university, is making sure you're building the accountability to outcomes in yourself. And again, that's just one thing that I think that kind of universal kind of 3-pronged view of how to view university life or directly going to the workforce all underpinned with accountability to outcomes is guidance that I would probably say would be helpful to a lot of people today.
Oh, there's a lot of wisdom there. And I really appreciate what you were saying about the supplementing that education. That's something we've not really discussed here on the show, but I'm sure we all know those people that are highly educated and very smart, but don't function very well. It's not effective education because they don't know how to apply it. And I think some of those soft skills you're talking about, getting out into the world, interfacing with people, developing those soft skills, going to seminars and talks and getting to see different perspectives. That's what's really going to make that education applicable and make the difference between somebody that knows a lot and somebody that's really successful. So I appreciate that viewpoint. I think there's a lot of wisdom there.
Well, no, and thank you for the commentary. I agree. And it's just one of these things over, you think about a traditional 4-year program and where technology is today and where it's going to be 4 years from now. It's really almost hard to say, but one thing we do know for certain is AI is the worst it's ever going to be right now. And so the changes that are going to come are going to continue to be fairly prolific, but things that won't change are, personal experience, the ability to connect with somebody, your presence in front of somebody else, specific knowledge that you have in terms of practical application, tangible skills. Like you had mentioned, you had a very successful build to sale of a roofing company. Being a good roofer isn't going to be replaced anytime soon. And so there are things that you can supplement your knowledge with that I think will be really important to kind of marry up with a traditional, even a non-traditional education kind of program post high school.
Wonderful. Well, let's transition a little bit. You got your 4-year degree, started working in finance. Can you walk us through maybe early career and up to running your own business?
Sure. So I got finished with college and went to work. I spent kind of the first 15 years of my career working for 3 different companies with kind of progressive increases in responsibility. So I started my career with kind of fixed income, institutional sales to banks and insurance companies. And then I ran parts of companies that did that. And then ultimately was operating a division of a publicly traded company. And that last role I was in for about 7 years. That's a role that brought me from Chicago to Central Texas back in 2007. And it was a great role. I really enjoyed it. It was a company that had gone from 10 million in revenue back in the late 90s to over 2 billion in revenue kind of shortly after I had joined. And so it was a really exciting journey. I learned a lot during that 7 years. It was something that kind of left an imprint on me. And I think if I look back at that first kind of 15 years of my career, the first 3 companies I worked for, one went from 14 million to 350 million in revenue. It went public. The next one went from about 2 million in revenue to about 125 million in revenue. And the last one went from about 10 million in revenue to about 2.1 billion. And, kind of at the time when you're in the thick of it, I didn't totally appreciate, what those CEOs had done and what those management teams had done and what I was doing to help create those unique outcomes. And taking a step back all these years later, I really appreciate those experiences and learned a lot from what those companies did to achieve massive growth over fairly short periods of time. And they were neat experiences to be a part of, but with each one, I was able to kind of get successive layers of management and responsibility. And then ultimately, when the last company I was working for sold in 2013, about 10 months later, I decided to do something different with my life, but wanted to stay in Central Texas. And so that kind of ultimately led me to joining Westlake Securities. But those first 15 years were pretty impactful. And I almost feel like in some ways, every year that's gone by, they've been almost a greater impact on what I do today.
Yeah, that's quite the impressive pedigree there. And like you mentioned, that's to be in one company that blows up on that scale would be quite an experience. To have done it 3 or 4 times, that's quite an education in itself.
It is. And one thing I share in a lot of my talks, especially, so I give these talks kind of internationally to CEO groups like WPO, YPO, Vistage, EEO, et cetera, the alternative board. The one thing I share in those talks is you can have and you should want to have big plans, and those things can be achieved through big planning. I would say if I learned anything from those first 15 years, it was, if you want to do something highly impactful with your organization, with your career, with a company, it's possible. I was working around a lot of very smart people. I would say very capable people, also very driven people. But I would say the one kind of consistent through there was, they had big plans and they were willing to go through big planning and also to take massive action on execution. I mean, you can think big and you can kind of plan, but you ultimately have to execute very well. But those three things are just, fundamental ingredients, I think, to achieving something like that. And it was very consistent throughout all three companies. But other than that, I wouldn't say that those organizations had like ultimately totally unique angles on things. It's just they walk the walk and talk the talk every day, but their path that they were on was, fairly ambitious for sure.
I want to take a moment to tell you about our new partner, Athlete Fresh. If you work hard or train hard, you know the frustration of trying to clean sweat out of your clothes. They just aren't the same. Your clothes come out stiff and they start to smell immediately if they get even a little bit wet. Most detergents don't actually dissolve sweat. They just mask it with strong fragrances. Athlete Fresh dives deep into fabrics, especially synthetics, to break down the enzymes that produce that smell. They rinse sweat out once and for all, leaving you with clean, fresh clothes. They can even bring new life to your favorite old work clothes or athletic gear by removing the residue that other detergents leave behind. Make sure you check out athletefresh.shop/FromTheGroundUpShow. So for a young business owner, a small business owner, I'm assuming probably the earlier the better, but at what point in time do you start setting those big, ambitious goals? And, I think a lot of especially blue collar business owners, they get into a trade, they're good at it, they get frustrated with their job or maybe get laid off, see a better way to do something, and they kind of start on their own, and it's more of this transition from practitioner to business owner. At what point in time do they really need to get serious about setting some goals and setting a plan of how do we get from, or where are we going, and how do we get from here to there?
Yeah, so great question. And we work with a lot of companies that I would say do real things, right? So concrete, roofing, electrical. I mean, all those sorts of businesses are the kinds of companies that we work with, food manufacturing. And so I would say there tends to be a crossover to where, like you mentioned, you go from an individual kind of practitioner or professional to having a business. And that sometimes occurs, it looks like something where, there's a few $100,000 of profit. You're starting to have multiple employees. You've kind of gotten beyond just yourself, one other person in a truck, to really having the crux of what's starting to look like a business, maybe a physical presence, a website, etc. And once that starts to occur, we usually kind of encourage people to get to a certain level of success where in one way it's feeling very easy and another way it's feeling very difficult. And when you've hit that moment, and it's a little different for everybody, it starts to be the time to think about bigger pictures and planning. And so the easy part tends to be like the business in and of itself. So there was probably a part where a lot of people that we've worked with, whether it was roofing, electric, food manufacturing, the actual kind of product part, pretty easy. I mean, they get it. They understand how to put a shingle on. They understand how to connect wires. They understand how to make a tortilla. But the business starts to become more complex. And the reason tends to be for that is they're working maybe too much in their business and not on their business. And when that crossover starts to come about, that's really the pivotal point for a lot of people to start engaging with maybe the book I've got coming up called Intentional Growth, to start thinking about architecting what's next. And there's different kind of life cycles in an organization where this concept I'm going to talk about makes sense, but this is one. Another one kind of tends to be for larger businesses that are maybe trying to go from, $1 million or $2 million of profit to $3 to $5 million of profit, and then from 10 to 25 and 25 to 50. So those are different kind of pivotal points where I think something like intentional growth can be really helpful. But one of the first concepts we talk about in the book is this concept of reverse engineering what you want to have happen. And we talk about it in two different ways. One is time, and one is financial outcome. And so it could be that the business really should have a view towards a 3 to 7 year time window. That's going to be a time window that we think is measurable from the perspective of, anything kind of less than 3 years is difficult to kind of plan for. Anything more than 7 starts to feel like, well, it's just kind of too far out there. So 3 to 7 years, pretty good. 5 being a peg in the ground, and then kind of picking a financial outcome that would be impactful to the business. So let's say you've got a business, you're getting started, you're $1 million of revenue, and you start to say, hey, over the next kind of 5 years, I'd really like to take the business from $1 million of revenue to $5 million of revenue. That would be an ambitious kind of financial goal that you'd set. And then what we start to do is plan back all the things that have to happen over the next 5 years for the business to get to 1 to 5, or from 5 to 10, or from 10 to 30, et cetera. And you can kind of keep going that way. But that reverse engineering course is really pivotal to setting both a timeline expectation and a financial outcome that we can really start planning from. And lastly, on this topic, I'll say the biggest mistake people tend to make is either not planning or planning in small increments. A lot of times we sit down and talk about something like maybe even a budgeting process. They're really just kind of looking kind of what's out ahead of them in terms of revenue, or what's out ahead of them in terms of maybe bring out another hire. But what they're not doing is thinking about planning a budget that's going to keep them on track with a 5-year goal or ambition, and then working back through what would the business have to become in order to hit that.
I can relate to all of that. I think you're kind of describing all of the things I did wrong when I was in that stage. So you brought us up in your story through kind of working in finance, and the company you were working for sold, which was kind of the next pivot point, the next point in your career. You mentioned from there you went to work for Wesley. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So really at that point in time, I knew I wanted to stay in Central Texas. I had a friend who had founded Westlake Securities back in 2003. And so he said, well, hey, you've been working with these large companies, helping them acquire and integrate smaller businesses. Why don't you come to Westlake and help us organize some thoughts around helping our client companies raise capital and go through merger and acquisition processes. And so I originally joined Westlake as a managing director in 2014, and then over time became the CEO in about 2018 time period. And then I acquired the company in 2019, but the company dated back to 03. So we've been around for about 23, 24 years. But then I acquired it in 2019 and have been leading it as both owner and operator since then. But it was a really fun journey for me. There was an early transaction where I had joined in 2014, kind of not totally knowing what to expect. I was not a career kind of investment banker per se. I mean, investments, finance, leadership, capital, M&A, integration, operations, yes, all that. But it was a little bit of a career shift for me, not a career change, but a career shift. And so when I came in and that first transaction went through, kind of the rest was history. It was a $52 million recapitalization of a restaurant group. And after that, enjoyed the business every day since. I mean, I'm kind of one of those people that, like Warren Buffett says, he skips into the office every day. And for me, I really appreciate and enjoy what we do every day in several different senses. I love kind of giving back to companies, creating opportunity for employees. It's been a lot of fun and a fun journey.
Oh, that's great. So you got to go shopping in the beginning of your career for smaller businesses for your employer to buy, and finally wound up buying one yourself and stepping into that role. I'm sure that was an exciting time, but also a little bit of a fearful time stepping into that much liability, kind of being the guy at the top. Can you tell us a little bit about the thought process there, some of the excitement, some of the fears?
Yeah, so it was interesting timing. So that occurred, I think, around September, August of 2019. And then you think about what happened just a few short months later, March of 2020, right? So I would say in the beginning, I was just so busy with all my ideas and thoughts and excitement for what was next, that I was just kind of busy, kind of in the trenches, so to speak, for a few months. But I will say shortly after, in April of 2020, that's kind of when it hit me, in the sense of, oh, golly, sitting there kind of 30 days into a giant question mark over, what was really going to happen and where things were going to go. That was kind of one of those really deeper soul searching moments. I think for me, it was kind of like around April 10th. I was like, so now I understand all this stuff about, risk of being a business owner and what it really means, and how you may have to put back, into your business before you get things out of it, et cetera. So that was kind of definitely one of the more of those gut check moments. Although I would say it was pretty short lived. I, was highly committed to what we were doing, highly passionate about it. We really kind of doubled down on activity. I would say one of the things that kind of came out of that, very brief moment of maybe questioning life a little bit was throwing myself back into, creating value for others. So we, shortly after, around that time period, we were just flooded with inbound inquiries from college folks who had their internships canceled. And so one of the things that we said, hey, we're gonna stay busy, we're gonna give back, we're gonna be active. We started a remote internship program, and since 2020, we've had 500 or 600 folks go through it from 5 different continents, and it's really been kind of an impactful give back for us. So even in the kind of that brief kind of dark gray moment, so to speak, I'm not going to call it black moment, but dark gray moment, we tended to kind of find something that, kept us busy, kept us giving back, and kept our name in front of the industry, so to speak.
So what was the most difficult step in that process of taking over Westlake and going from employee to owner and being the guy at the top, the guy in charge?
So I think the most difficult step was really just around prioritization. I think whenever you step into a entrepreneurial setting, there's so many things that you can actually do with a company that it almost can be overwhelming and can be confusing in the sense of what are the real priorities. And so for me, that was definitely a moment where I had to think through what I really wanted the company to become, and then how to, again, just using this reverse engineering. I think one of the benefits, I had is I'd been using this reverse engineering strategy for years. And so I applied those tactics to myself. We apply it still to this day in terms of thinking through kind of what do I really want to see happen? And then what are the most kind of important elements that really needed to come out of that? And so I didn't have a brief moment where I was almost overwhelmed with, we can do the website, we could raise money ourselves, we could go look for acquisitions, we could hire people. There's all these different levers of growth started kind of flooding into myself. And I had to take a deep breath and say, okay, if we do them all, I'm going to be fatigued. Our organization is going to be fatigued, and we're going to start failing on multiple levels. And so what we did was really take a step back and prioritize. We knew we wanted to build a brand. And so that was something that we really doubled down and reinvested in terms of building a brand and building a real recognizable face to the company, so to speak. We knew certain things about, we want to have a business that wasn't just about selling companies, but also about helping companies grow. And so today our business is kind of equally split between those that are seeking growth and seeking liquidity. And so a lot of the things that we are today, kind of these years later, 7 years later, those little seeds and kernels were started to form all the way back to 2019. But I would say I, had my own moment of just almost being overwhelmed by all the different directions you can go in, and needing to kind of step back, and that own kind of reverse engineering path was actually helpful to me at that time too.
Yeah, you get to practice what you preach and put it to work, and it appears like that worked well for you.
Yeah, I would say so. A lot of the things that we set out to accomplish over the first 5 years of the company, I'd say we did an excellent job at. We have, I reset our next 5-year plan kind of going forward about a year ago, where we've got even more ambition in terms of growth. And, I think it's been exciting for our team. We've done some things that are pretty cool of late. And so we, won an industry award in Houston for Deal of the Year. Next book coming out, the speaking has kind of really mushroomed from where it was 3 years ago compared to a year ago compared to right now. And so just a lot of things that have been organizationally exciting to see. And I think, one of the reasons why that reverse engineering is so important is and where I've seen it kind of firsthand is just kind of cultural excitement for what it is you're doing. And it really doesn't matter if, again, you've got a plumbing business, roofing business, electrical, food manufacturing, if you're making kind of imprinted t-shirts, whatever it is that you're doing, retail, online, et cetera, doesn't really, if you've got people around you, if you've got employees, having a kind of a reverse engineered plan and then celebrating some of the wins along the way, you'll see what ends up happening is that your organizational culture will just continue to blossom, and you'll start to develop a culture of winning. And I think that's one thing that our team is really kind of excited about, is like I think we all like to win. We like to close transactions. We like to bring on new clients. We like to set new milestones. And so it's kind of organizationally fun for us when we achieve, one of those elements. And again, I'll go back to 2019 early days. That just seems so far off at that point. But if you map that course and you're just consistent, these things kind of tend to flywheel, and it's hard to describe, but victory brings kind of more victory in a lot of senses, and just like a sports team, so to speak.
Yeah, people like to be winners. They like to be on the winning team. The more you win, the more support you get. The more you win, the more buy-in you get, and it definitely has a kind of an immeasurable momentum, I think. So, well,
Yeah.
that makes a great segue. We talked about kind of your early career and how you were kind of uniquely trained to do what you're doing now with the experiences you have buying and selling businesses for other businesses and being part of some pretty phenomenal growth. And then you got the opportunity to put that into practice yourself as CEO with you at the helm, buying and growing a business. So now my understanding is that is kind of exactly what you do for your clients. Can you help us understand a little better? I know there's a lot of financial jargon, liquidity and exits and mergers and acquisitions, M&A, enterprise value, but kind of for the layman in plain terms, what are the services that you provide? What do you do for your clients?
So, great question. We do two things at its essence. We have about half of our clients are folks who are seeking what we call intentional growth. So, they're seeking to grow their business over a measured period of time using a predictable framework to do it. So, that's about half of what we do. And then the other half of what we do is people that are, ultimately seeking intentional liquidity, and that can come in either a smaller chunk or a minority deal, or it can come from a larger kind of either low majority all the way through a full exit scenario. And so that really makes up our clients is, again, people that are interested in growth and people that are interested in liquidity. For people that are interested in growth, we really utilize the framework from intentional growth to help them work through a journey of getting from where they are to where they want to be, using kind of that 3 to 7 year time period, and achieving a financial outcome that would be motivational to both them and their key stakeholders. And so we do that with a combination of, advisory, consulting, potentially capital raising, potentially buying other companies, growing their business organically, maybe greenfielding new locations, products, or services. But we can really help them organize their thoughts around how they can best achieve a great outcome, maybe an outcome that's far in excess of the current trajectory of their business. So that's the growth side. The liquidity side really has to do with when people are starting to think about, what does their business really start to translate to them personally? And that may mean that somebody's kind of mid-career. And so rather than selling the entirety of their business, they may want to look at selling a third of their business to take some chips off the table or to get some capital out of their business personally, but then also to have more capital to reinvest in the business to grow. And so sometimes a transaction like that could be, selling, again, a third of their business, taking half the capital for personal means, and then the other half to go on balance sheet of the company. Or it may mean all the way through a full exit. And when somebody's ready for a full exit, we really kind of work with them on the proper preparation to get to a premium valuation. And that's really where, we tend to shine, is helping companies better prepare for a transaction that they're going to be truly proud of. And that's about half our practice. And we've been fortunate to work with a number of really amazing companies over time that have had sensational kind of exits or majority transactions. And so that part's really fun for us too. So the whole life cycle for us has really been fun, but we feel like each business has kind of a unique kind of journey. And so generally speaking, our growth journey is going to start maybe about halfway through somebody's kind of entrepreneurial journey, potentially, just on average. And then our kind of intentional liquidity is going to start maybe 3/4 or closer to the end of somebody's kind of career journey. So I kind of call it like we're back half of the career services. So when somebody's got built a platform that's ready to scale, we can help them do it. And when somebody's ready to take a scale platform and think about what's next, we can do it.
Oh, man, that's perfect. Well, I know I want to spend a considerable amount of time here talking about kind of preparing for exits and that kind of thing. I think that's something that's really hot right now in the industries that our listenership is probably made up of. But I want to roll back one more question kind of about the coaching or growth side of your business. You said you typically kind of take people in on the second half of their entrepreneurial journey. Your services are probably more on that growth and development, not getting the business initially started or off the ground. What would be some key signs for a business owner that they're ready for that next step, that they kind of have their business established, they're ready to start focusing on growth, or maybe they need the type of services that you offer?
Sure. So we're typically starting to see kind of a combination of people, process, and system in place that you can really say, hey, there's a real business there. And so generally we're going to start to see some employees. Generally, we're going to start to see multiple customers. We're going to start to see multiple stakeholders. We're going to start to see, the beginnings of, an accounting system. We're going to see some of the beginnings of, employee processes, maybe it's a little bit on training, things of that nature. So a little bit of financial scale. So we're really going to start to see that the business has achieved a certain level of performance to where its existence isn't in total question, right? You've already got, some things kind of working for you where you've got people, process, systems in place. From there, we tend to scale up in terms of organizations. That's about our starting place. But a lot of companies that we're working with are really trying to get from that place to being at a place where they would be able to have an institutional investor come in. And that typically starts to move into 7 figures of profit. And then a lot of the times the companies that we're working with are also companies that are much deeper into their life cycle to where they're trying to get from, 3 million of profit to 7 million, or 7 million to 12 million, and 12 million to 25. And so we work with companies kind of throughout that spectrum. But for us, in terms of working with an organization, we really need to start to see some of the semblances of like a business that's really trying to get to scale. Although I'll say, the book and some of our online materials and things that we have at our website will help companies, from day one, in terms of thinking through some of these topics. But in terms of like where we can be helpful to an organization and start to interact with them one-on-one, we're starting to see, again, some signs of like the business kind of really starting to look like a business as opposed to a sole practitioner.
And I would bet that, there's a fee associated with the type of assistance you guys provide. And so there probably has to be a level of success that kind of justifies that fee, where you guys are going to be able to provide the benefits that outweigh that fee. Is there kind of a baseline there that you would recommend when it really makes sense to start paying for a coach, paying for help and growing your business, rather than, grabbing I guess I don't have a better word than cheaper, but more do-it-yourself resources like reading a book or listening to podcasts, something that's more readily available?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And when you're early in a business, the competition for resources and your personal compensation is pretty real.
Yeah, most business startups, cash is tight. They don't have a lot of money to spread around. So.
Yeah, cash is tight. When cash is tight, when your resources and your compensation are in competition for each other, you really have to take advantage of all the things that are available, like podcasts, books, etc. Things that are high value, low cost.
Yeah.
So then what happens is you get to a place to where the business is scaled. And again, you've got these people, process, and systems to where all of a sudden you start to see a little bit of a diminishing return for low cost elements or value in it, right? There's always, like, I buy books. I mean, I'm the first one to go to half price books, and I'll buy a $7 book. I'll go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble, and I'll get a $30 hardcover brand new. And I'm the first one that will buy a book and kind of use it to help grow on something that is really a topic of interest to me at that time. But at some point, there tends to be a little bit of diminishing returns to that, in the sense of at some point you need, a lot of entrepreneurial journeys, someone who's been there and done that, who can help shortcut getting from here to there. And so, a lot of times kind of lower cost content is just not going to ultimately get you there. It may get you started in the thought process, but it's not going to get you all the way there. And so that tends to be where organizations like ours can kind of start to play a role. I would also say CEO peer groups can also play a role in that. There's some great, organizations out there that aren't terribly expensive, but can give you a little bit of a peer network to start to grow. But those sorts of things, when all your financial resources start to grow and you start to kind of place higher and higher value on your time and you want to find shorter paths to success, that's really where like CEO peer groups, firms like ours, consultants, etc., coaches can really come into play to help you, short circuit kind of that growth path.
And I know clearly with your guys' background, your personal background experience, the success you guys have seen, it appears you guys provide extreme value, real value. But we live in a time where it seems like almost everyone that gets laid off or downsized is all of a sudden a coach or a consultant, maybe without the
Yeah.
background and the experience. What advice would you have for someone that is at that point where they need a little bit more specific advice? They need some coaching. They need that shortcut. How do they find and vet a coach, a consultant, a firm like yours that's going to provide real value rather than somebody that just decided being a coach was better than finding a new job?
Yeah, so that's a great point, and I do think you have to be a little bit of careful where you spend your time and money, and in particular your time, especially almost at any stage of business. Time's our greatest asset and
Mhm.
our most expensive resource. So, where I generally tend to coach folks is you want to have kind of mentors, if you will, or advisors, however you want to phrase it, somebody who's on your team, kind of at three different levels, and each different level is going to be weighted towards where you're at in your life cycle. So for three levels are theory, next is witness, and last is the practitioner. And so theory is somebody who you can learn from, who actually has studied the topic. They have put books out on it. They may have classes on it, but they're teaching in theory, meaning they've studied it. They may have even had some relative experiences, but they've never actually probably done it themselves. And this is going to be the type of mentorship that's the easiest to access, and it's probably going to be the least expensive, right? But it can be very helpful, and that's available in different kind of formats, all the way from a traditional university all the way through non-traditional education. Then you have the witness, and the witness is somebody who really has been close to somebody who's done it. And so that person that maybe got laid off, that started their own practice, who was CFO for an organization, or somebody who was an operating executive or partner inside of an organization. Maybe they weren't like the guy or girl, but they weren't, they're not far from it. They kind of witnessed what happened.
Mm.
That's another form of mentor advisor you can get, and that's going to probably eke up a little bit in cost, but probably somebody who's a little bit closer to what it takes. And then the last is the actual practitioner, the person that's been there and done it. And I really encourage people to, anytime you're going to spend time and money, to think about where they fit in that spectrum and to make sure you're allocating your time and financial resources appropriately. And so one of the biggest mistakes we tend to see people make is to put too much time and money into mentors or advisors that are theorists as opposed to, actual practitioners. You've got to weight each one of those things with time and money appropriately.
That's a good way to break that down. I like that. And yeah, I can relate to those. I think I've benefited from all three types of advisors, but I've never heard it broken down like that.
I'll sign up for all this stuff. Like I love it, but I am going to have a sharp lens for, is this something that maybe I can listen to on my own time when I'm working out or driving, etc. And using that fashion, or is it something I'm going to actually take? If I'm going to take an hour out of my day to do something kind of in the 8 to 5 realm, it's got to be it's got to be somebody whom I find impressive.
Yeah.
Outside of those hours, I'll kind of wait different ways, but that's kind of how I guard my time and financial wallet, if you will, and that stuff is, if it's going to enter my 9 to 5 or my 8 to 5, it's got to be, it's got to be somebody who's been someplace and done something pretty important for me to dedicate an hour during the day. Outside of that, I'm a little bit more, I'll take a little bit of risk in terms of time, but during that window in particular, I'm it's got to be important.
You got to have that value add. And I love that while you're driving, working out, the podcast, the audiobooks, things like that are awesome. Very little risk, very little cost. But to give up time that could be spent growing your business, making money, that's valuable, and they better give you some value there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'll go to the education buffet, before and after work, but during the main hours, I want a particular meal served a certain way if I'm going to give up an hour.
That's meat and potatoes time, not salad time. Oh man.
That steak medium and frites, although they're French fries. I'm not sure why they call them frites, but yeah, That's the way I like it. That's the only meal I want to eat between 9 and 5 when it comes to education, so to speak.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I wanted to move into the M&A side of things and talk about that
Sure.
half of your business. For the entrepreneur, the business owner that's out there that is either ready to start looking at an exit or is just trying to plan ahead, that 3 to 7 years ahead, they know they're kind of getting ready for that, entering that market. What sort of things can they do to best be preparing to have a solid valuation and have a business that is viable?
So again, great question. And I'm going to give a couple different answers here. So one time I was asked, what time frame should I think about if I want full liquidity for my business, both financially and time wise? And I want to be thoughtful and achieve a premium valuation. How should I think about that timeline? And I took a deep breath, 8 years. And I think the the guy that asked me the question almost fainted. But it really is a long journey in the sense of if you want full liquidity from your business from a time and financial perspective, and you want to do it in a premium way. And there's all kinds of answers that I'll get to here to shorten this timeline. But I want to give you the premium answer first. So let's break that down. 8 years, typically 1 year for internal prep. So that's team, right? Do we have the right people on the bus? Process? Do we have the right systems in place, et cetera? We want to make sure that we've got some of those things buttoned up long before we ever go into a process. So we got history in terms of them working. Secondly, once we get through that first year of internal prep, now we're thinking about external prep and transaction. That's going to be finding an advisor, right, to help market the business, help you get it sold. That's going to be finding a M&A attorney who really focuses on M&A work. And so, again, I can share a little bit about that, but it's really important to have advisors that focus only on M&A and the type of M&A that you're looking at doing. Tax, when it comes to transactions, tax is much different than just general annual tax. Even for business owners, it can be quite a bit different. So you want to assemble that team, you want to go to market, you're actually going to transact. So once you transact, now we're 2 years into this process. For most CEOs, they're going to end up kind of transitioning over a 2 to 3 year period, right? So either there's going to be an internal candidate or an external candidate. It's going to take some time to bring that person up to make sure that they're going to succeed. And then ultimately you start to see the first component of kind of liquidity from time is maybe 2 to 3 years post transaction. And then you're going to see, when you transacted, for most people, they're going to have some sort of contingent consideration, largely in the form of rolled equity. And so when you transact again, sorry, I'm going to go back a little bit here. You may be asked to leave 10 to 30% of equity on the table. You got that CEO transition. So you've transitioned your role. So your time's starting to drop off, but you may still own 10 to 30% of the business. And the next transaction may be 5 years after your first transaction. And so let's kind of backtrack here. We've got a year of prep, internal. We've got our team and transaction. We've got 3 years of CEO transition and probably 2 more years of kind of ultimate growth, readiness, and final transaction. And you add all that up, and it's 8 years start to finish to get a premium transaction done. And a lot of times they end up there, but they don't realize they're going to. And so we try to preach a little bit of message of awareness is start to think about that earlier so that you're not tied up in your business kind of time-wise and financially wise longer than you may otherwise want to be. And look, we do transactions where, somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm ready to sell and I'd like to conclude a transaction. We even have that conversation going on right now where that somebody would like to conclude a transaction before year end. But whenever we're limited on preparations, that's going to potentially have some sort of impact on ultimate valuation and how a process goes. And there's still likely going to be several months or even years of kind of financial and time tied up in the business, even post-transaction, even if we start today, transact at the end of the year. So, but it does, I guess in short, it does take time to, thoughtfully transact. And the number of transactions where we see people close and the next day they're doing something else is pretty low. There usually is some sort of transition period from transaction to transition.
I would imagine every transaction is a negotiation. There's probably a trade-off with those two things. Is there kind of a generic relationship there between the trade-off of valuation for, a 2 or 3 year time commitment, or that rollover equity, or is that pretty unique to each transaction?
Again, great question. You came well prepared today. So, it's probably not a sharp, you know, immediate answer or kind of go to. What I would say though is generally helpful is when we're running a process, if somebody's willing to roll a little bit of equity and to stay on through a reasonable transition period, what that's doing is it's reducing risk to the buyer.
Mhm.
And anytime we're reducing risk for somebody, they're probably willing to be a little bit more competitive in their offer compared to if somebody is not willing to roll or they want to walk away from the company within a month after the close. What that is doing is positioning more risk in a transaction because the buyer knows that the seller no longer has any financial incentives for the business to continue to succeed, and they're not really willing to put in any time to ensure the continued success of the business. And so that actually heightens risk and probably lowers the ability for that buyer to be competitive with their offer. And a lot of times it's not really the scene in the sense of, the buyer won't share with you, hey, if you're willing to roll and stick around, we're going to give you more. And if you're not, we're going to give you less. It really is just almost implied in the valuations. And I would say we see it and we feel it, but it's looking at kind of just pointing to a raw data point is pretty difficult. But if I were to, and again, this is all kind of gut feel, there's not like a lot of hard data, given that this may live forever. And I do want to caveat this. If we were to say the difference, I mean, it can be as much as 50% difference in valuation from somebody willing to roll equity and really hard charge and transition well to somebody who's kind of coming to the table saying kind of, I'm tired and I just want my money and I'm going to be, out after the close. It can be as much as 50% intuitively, I would say.
Wow. I would not have guessed that much. As you and I discussed earlier, we just recently concluded an exit of our business, and we negotiated and entertained a number of offers, a few structured both ways with some pretty considerable rollover and time commitment, and some that were kind of just a check and walk away, and a few that had a balance somewhere in the middle. And we didn't see that quite that big of a split. That's a number that surprises me a little bit. But for
Yeah.
for the owner that is in that, maybe they've waited too long, they're just done, they're over it, they're ready to get out. Is there any hope to have a successful transaction if they're unwilling to leave that liquidity on the table, or that rollover equity, or if they're unwilling to give that time commitment?
Yes, there are things that can be done. And well, go back to one kind of comment you said with disparity. So I would say that was kind of the widest range. They can be narrower. So I think and every process is unique. It also depends on scale and buyer, et cetera. And so it also, if you're involving strategics, I mean, sometimes a strategic in particular. So if you're selling your company into a company that's already doing what you do, there may be kind of a reduced emphasis on the importance of the owner, which can be helpful to somebody who's, wanting to kind of transition more quickly. So again, those are some caveats, but it can be as wide as 50%. It can be as narrow as, 0 or 10% too. It just depends kind of across the board there. So, and then switching gears into your question, I think there are a lot of things people can do. One of the things that all of our projects start off with a QVG assessment. That's a Westlake trademarked quality value growth, or QVG assessment, where we really look at certain gaps inside of the business from an investor's or buyer's lens. And what we're trying to do kind of in those early days when we're working with a company is to take the buyer's lens or investor's lens and really kind of identify what they're going to see and to try to shore up those gaps as quickly as possible. And so one of the things that we could do, if you're kind of been at the business, I'll take a case study. We had somebody who was in those exact shoes. They were in the business for a long time and kind of getting tired, maybe had a little bit of health issues starting to go on. And what we ended up kind of doing is starting conversations with the number 2 person in their company very early in the process about potentially kind of rising up to be president and then ultimately CEO in the organization. And so by the time we got to market, we actually had an identified leader of the business who was a known quantity. I think they had been there 17 or 18 years. And so they had built a lot of historical operating knowledge. They had relationships with all the customers, employees, et cetera. They were kind of a natural go-to. And so we really were able to tell a reduced risk story that even though our founder may be going away shortly after the close, we actually had this next person in line who is the natural leader fit, so to speak. And so there's things we can do throughout the business to communicate reduced risks that, ideally we'd have more time, but if we don't, there's still things that can be done to present a better story to a potential buyer.
That's great. And my specific example, the one firm we were looking at, that was kind of their business model. They actually, they would not allow the owner to stay on. They ran an in-house CEO training organization. And so when they bought a business, they had a CEO kind of waiting in the wings, ready to go. And the old owner stepped out. The new owner came in and took over. And that was kind of their business model. So I thought that was a unique business model. That's not something you see all the time, is it?
No, but again, the wonderful thing about this environment today is the universe for buyers has expanded so much that I would say 10 years ago, rules of thumb were a little bit more applicable, and you could speak to maybe 85% instances. I would say today, a lot of times when we're speaking, we're kind of, if we're giving a generality, it's probably only 65% applicable. Yeah. There's just another third of the industry that's doing all sorts of different things that maybe they weren't doing 10 years ago. And so it's kind of an exciting time to be a seller because there are a lot of different flavors in the ice cream shop of M&A, so to speak. It's not just vanilla and chocolate anymore. There's pistachio and coffee, nutmeg, and all sorts of different flavors of ice cream in the M&A ice cream shop, so to speak.
That's a great analogy, and that's exactly what we found. We negotiated offers with, I think, 5 different individuals or firms, and every one of them was extremely unique in the structure of the deal, the payout, the time commitment, rolled equity. They were all very unique. It was eye-opening to me that it wasn't just a cut and clear process or cut and clear formula, but it was like everybody just making it up as they went. So I've heard the statistic that 75% of people that try to sell their business are unsuccessful in that endeavor. Could you speak to that statistic a little bit? That sounds like an alarming statistic. Is it something that's maybe misunderstood, or what are the pieces that really make the difference there?
Yeah, so I think that's probably right. And I think couple of things that I would recommend to increase those probabilities. Number one is having a strong intermediary on your side can be hugely helpful. And so I do think that's something that, we generally advocate for is having an intermediary with you, but making sure that they're qualified. There's a lot of difference between, the upper and lower range of the investment banking. And then you go below that and you've got business brokers, but there's a lot of difference between firm to firm and individual to individual. And so I would do a lot of vetting before I selected someone, but I would probably encourage you to have somebody, because what it will allow you to do is to have somebody who, does transactions for a living on your side. It's going to allow you to spend your time working on your business as opposed to working on your business and your transaction, even though at some point you'll also be working on your transaction, but it can be a helpful kind of time saver, a time leverage, if you will. That right there in and of itself will increase your odds of getting a transaction done. Going from there, though, what I would say is, being kind of thoughtful in terms of preparation. Again, if you've selected an advisor, it's giving you a prescriptive path to, being able to make it through a diligence process, follow it. So one of the things that we like to encourage our clients to do is to get some financial diligence done and out of the way early on. Financial diligence is the number one bust contributor of all deals, meaning a person goes to market or a company goes to market, their financials are not in line to go through a diligence process, and the buyer is just left with, what do I do with this? We can't get there. And so the buyer will either walk away or they'll retrade the seller, which oftentimes also leads to a bust. And so I think 2 things, if you get nothing out of this podcast that you can do to increase your odds, is selecting a high quality intermediary. Okay. Preferably, if your business is doing over $1 million of profit, you want somebody that has a securities license, and there's all sorts of reasons for that. But then number two would be to make sure your organization, your company is diligence ready from a financial perspective. That's really, really important. Again, that's gonna increase your odds of transacting immeasurably.
That's some good advice there. And I know we did have an awesome broker kind of helping us walk through it, and we had a great M&A attorney on our side, and that diligence process was still, I had no idea that you could go that deep into some of our records. It was an eye-opening experience for me, and I think I would willingly sign up for a number of prostate exams before I went through that again. It was not a fun experience.
Yeah, yeah, it's like having a procedure with no anesthesia at times.
Yeah, yeah, and at the time we were growing, and the reason we had caught the eye of some buyers was because we were growing. So trying to keep running a growing organization, trying to maintain growth, and then also go through that process, it was like working 3 full-time jobs at once. It was not a fun experience, but
well, and you were in such a hot space, roofing. There's just so much going on there right now. And there has been for some time, so it makes a ton of sense. And the other thing I would just say is like making sure the business performance and the industry interest is timed well. So again, kind of the internal, external. So for instance, if your business is growing well, that's going to be highly contributed to getting a successful transaction done. If your industry is very active in terms of M&A, that's going to help. So conversely, if your business is underperforming or kind of sliding off, and you can kind of see it in the monthly numbers, just know that it's going to be fairly difficult to transact at sort of market multiples, so to speak. And or if your industry is starting to see some declines in interest, kind of same thing. So there are some things that you can look at and just say, is this going to be a good time or not? So if the business and industry are going up, it's going to be a much better time than if the business and industry are going down. I mean, I know that sounds simple, but sometimes people like overlook that, or they think, the business and industry are going down, and now's the time I'm going to sell and get a premium multiple for their company. And that just, really doesn't happen. It's not probably realistic in a lot of instances.
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of luck involved there of kind of timing the market right, especially on the industry side of things. You might be more in control of the success of your business, but the market activity and your particular industry, there's just a lot of timing and a little bit of luck involved on that side of things. I know you and I were discussing previously that, you mentioned roofing, and kind of the trades service industry as a whole is extremely hot right now. You mentioned maybe somewhat unprecedented the way that industry is moving. What are you seeing kind of in the market, and how does that affect the M&A world right now?
So great question. And I'll go back to, the luck commentary. I think, that's probably true in this bigger picture sense of like, you're lucky. We'll use your instance if that's okay, your example. So lucky to have picked roofing. But when it comes to like specific industry activity, there's actually a lot of data out there. And so one of the things I would kind of encourage people to do is to, find some good data and just be aware of what's generally going on in their industry. And you don't have to kind of keep up with it monthly, but I do think like a check-in every quarter or 6 months to see what's going on with activity in your space is pretty important as a, founder and owner. Look, for a lot of us, we're doing this entrepreneurial journey for a number of reasons, but financial outcome is probably part of that, right? And so having a little bit of pulse on what's going on in your industry is important. And there's several industries that are experiencing all-time 20-year highs in terms of both activity and valuation. So roofing, HVAC, anything with utility services, food manufacturing. There's a number of industries, and they're all industries that are doing real things, but they're industries that are seeing a real kind of renaissance in terms of valuation and views of valuation. The other one is, asset management or wealth management. That's another one that's seeing kind of all-time highs in terms of where valuations are. And so for folks that own those sorts of companies, any of the ones I mentioned, and there's probably several others, I mean, it really is kind of an interesting time to at least understand what your company is worth and or potentially consider, how you might want to view the asset and potential kind of turning that asset into liquid capital, because there are some cycles to all this stuff. I mean, in a lot of instances, the valuations don't just kind of keep going up. They kind of cycle, and then they kind of return to some sort of mean, and then cycle again and cycle again. But those are some industries that are experiencing kind of 20-year all-time highs.
Yeah, I know
from the
that
data.
the roofing industry is very hot right now, but maybe even HVAC is even far exceeding that. I'm talking to people and hearing stories of, you know, 12x, 13x EBITDA exits as a someone that's maybe more on the investor side of thing and looking at investments right now. That just it seems almost mind-boggling to me to invest in something with that much risk at that multiple. Could you help us understand why that is? Why is that industry so hot right now, and what justifies those multiples?
So there is some level of justification, although at certain points in time, I tend to question a little bit of the sanity of it, right? So it's hard not to some degree. When in particular, there's another industry I'm thinking of right now. Is talking to a company. They got an unsolicited offer for 17 times EBITDA. Now, if you think about 17 times EBITDA, and this is a different industry than HVAC, but it's another one that's kind of peaking. You think about the number of years after tax it would take to earn that purchase price back. The individual had asked, what should we do? And I said, hey, we always come from a position of advising the way we'd want to be advised. And so I'd love to run a process for you, but maybe we can just help you get this exact unsolicited offer done. I mean, at 17 times, you're really kind of taking enough chips off the table to ensure family security, individual security. You're probably kind of getting pretty darn close to a peak multiple. It's hard to kind of sit there and say you shouldn't just kind of run at that. And so for HVAC, what's gone on there is you've seen a number of kind of platforms that are private equity owned. And as they've continued to scale, their platforms are going up what we call the EBITDA ladder, in the sense of the platform's multiple kind of continues to tick up. And so as the platform's multiple continues to tick up, it allows them to pay more for companies that they're acquiring into that platform. And so what that means is if you've got a platform that you think is worth 20 times EBITDA, if you're buying a company for 10 times EBITDA, it's kind of a no-brainer, even if 10 times seems expensive. And why is that? So if my company is worth 20 times EBITDA, let's say my platform HVAC company over here, I think it's worth 20 times EBITDA, and I'm going to buy somebody's company doing $1 million of EBITDA, and I'm going to pay them 10 times for it. The moment I bring that $1 million of EBITDA into my platform company and it seasons a little bit, that $1 million of EBITDA is now worth $20 million.
Yeah.
And so by doing a transaction for 1 million of EBITDA at 10x and bringing that $1 million of EBITDA into my platform company that's worth 20 times EBITDA, I've actually made about $10 million as the owner of this larger organization at close. And so that's kind of what we're seeing going on in the HVAC space. Is you've got these large scale platforms that have very large EBITDA multiples, and they're able to afford to pay more to bring in additional companies into their platform through acquisition.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's what I was seeing in roofing as well. Just I'm just a lowly roofer here, looking at what I see on the market, but there's 5 or 6, well, really probably three massive national companies with 2 more kind of biting at their heels that are competing over, the largest spot in the industry, and they're buying up, $100 million a year companies at a 12 or 13x. And so then you have these smaller companies or the private equity that looks at that and goes, okay, well, if we go buy 5 $20 million companies at an 8x, now we've got a $100 million company we can sell at a 12x. And the next level of investors down, the next level of private equity looks at that and goes, okay, well, I can go buy 4 $5 million companies at a 6x and have a $20 million company to sell at an 8x. And it just keeps laddering up like you were describing. Have you seen cycles like that? Have you seen that anomaly occur previously in your career? How at some point in time that has to come to an end? What does that look like?
So I definitely have seen this before, and what I really refer to this back to is the EBITDA ladder. So let me kind of walk through that really quick, and we'll talk about how potentially this journey goes for these different industries. So the EBITDA ladder basically starts off at the bottom rung, and the bottom rung is going to be what we kind of call for, let's just say, industries and businesses that do real stuff. It's going to be two guys in a truck, right? Or two people in a truck. And essentially, that's going to be kind of an individual practitioner or a very small business. And those tend to trade for maybe 2 to 3 times profitability. And really, EBITDA at that point is not a total measure. It's really more of like seller discretionary earnings or kind of profitability. As you scale all the way up to the top of the ladder, you may hit a publicly traded company with full share liquidity for investors. And that EBITDA multiple may be, 20 times. Okay. And so you go from the bottom rung of, let's say, 2 times to the top rung of 20, and everybody else is slotting in the different rung along the way. And so you might start to see in this example, a business at 5 million of EBITDA is going to start to trade at 7 times, and a business at 25 million of EBITDA may start to trade at 12 to 13 times. And then you may see something even more scale at 15 times. And ultimately you get to that very large, maybe a brand that we'd even recognize kind of trading at 20 times EBITDA, full liquidity on the New York Stock Exchange. And so these organizations are going along that journey of the EBITDA ladder. And so where this kind of ends, if you will likely be with several of these companies IPOing into the public markets so that they ultimately achieve that top rung of the ladder. And so what you've seen is kind of these platforms being pieced together at 4 and 5 times EBITDA, and then 8 to 10 times, and then probably low teens. And then ultimately those organizations are going to be scaled to a point where they've got hundreds of millions of EBITDA, if not a billion of EBITDA. And then ultimately they'll IPO and probably trade it around 20 times. Yep. And they'll continue acquiring. And why is that? Because they're going to be trading at 20 times. They're going to have full liquidity of their shares, and they're going to be able to pay maybe 8 to 12 times for companies that they buy. And again, they're using that EBITDA multiple arbitrage as a way of increasing shareholder value.
Okay. So this is not necessarily a cycle with a dead end at the end of the road. It may continue.
Well, so that's the good picture. And there will be companies that get to that, no doubt in my mind. The tougher picture will be not everybody will get there. And unfortunately, somebody will over leverage and under operate, and you'll see a flame out. And we've seen this in industry after industry, time and time again, where somebody, I call it over leverage and under operate, meaning they borrowed too much money to build their scale. And as they were building scale, they were not putting in place the right people, systems, and process to keep everything growing in a uniform and healthy way. And ultimately, performance will go down, leverage is too high, and we'll see a flame out for sure. And so I feel fully convinced we'll see a really wonderful scenario, or maybe multiple wonderful scenarios where you've got these companies that IPO and create unique opportunities for stakeholders along the way. And I feel pretty confident we'll see, an organization or two kind of flame out and be some tougher stuff and have to reorganize itself, and there'll be some tougher times. But those things are natural. It's part of the scaling journey. And I will say, though, overall, it does create some really unique opportunities for stakeholders across the board. It really does. If you think about where valuations were for, roofers, electrical companies, you think about fence, rental, you think about a lot of these industries that have seen some renaissance periods of valuation. You think about where they were 10 years ago compared to today. It's still pretty good times. It's still there's still been some benefits to this valuation renaissance, if you will.
Well, you just mentioned one of my key questions I wanted to ask. Is there kind of a rough generic valuation model that people could apply to their businesses that transcends most industries? I know, as a business owner, that's a huge question. Is what is my business worth? What does exit look like? And what does the future look like as we plan for the next generation or retirement or that kind of thing? Is there a rough generic model that we could apply to get a rough idea of valuation?
So I'm going to give a very general answer to that, and I'm going to give a very specific answer to it. So the general answer is think about that EBITDA ladder. We spent some time kind of talking through that. So a business that's maybe early or small. So again, very owner centric, if you will, maybe 2 employees, not making a ton of money. Let's call it low 6 figures. That business is going to generally be 2 to 3 times profitability. And again, that's assuming that the business is diverse and it's actually got some underpinnings of a real business. as you start to scale, let's say you get to low seven figures of profitability, you're going to start to see that 4 to 5x range. You get to more of an institutional level. So we kind of call that around 3 million of profitability or EBITDA. You're starting to become more institutional in terms of private equity funds themselves will buy you as a platform company. And that's probably a whole hour in and of itself defining what a platform company is. But you start to be more institutional. That can be anywhere from 5 to 6 times, maybe even 7. And then when you get to 10 million of EBITDA, that's really when you start to see the high single digits. And depending on your industry, as we talked about, maybe even low double digits. And so for most of us, that's going to be kind of the path that's most of importance. And then again, at the top end of the ladder, you've got publicly traded companies that are, in the mid-teens, high teens, if you will. But that's maybe a good way to think about it from a broad perspective. From a narrow perspective, you can dial that in 2 ways. Number one is the size and scale of the business. And secondly is your industry multiple. And so there is quite a bit of a difference between maybe being a roofer and maybe being a general contractor, for instance. And so we can kind of narrow those ranges down within a pretty good, kind of zip code, if you will, of valuation by having both industry and range. And we publish a lot of data. We just actually sent out an email today for Q1 statistics are in. And so we actually publish a lot of data of where multiples are based on size and industry. And if you have those 2 variables, you can get a pretty good sense for what your business is worth. Things that will make it worth more or less will vary from company to company. So they're fairly obvious. So if you have a $1 million profit, $3 million, $5 million EBITDA business, and you've got, half of the business is tied up with one customer, your business is going to be worth less than somebody who's got a lot of diversification of their customer base. And so, and there's just some kind of intuitive things that, they're going to strike you as, being fairly self-explanatory as to what would make a business be worth more or less. But those sorts of things can impact kind of one layer deeper. So size, number one, industry, number 2, the actual business being kind of the third kind of dial-in factor along the way.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's very helpful and answers a lot of questions for a lot of business owners, because that's kind of a key part of that, 8-year preparation and sales cycle, and that 3 to 7 year planning cycle is looking forward to that exit and knowing what to expect. So,
yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, it's all important stuff. And I think, and again, if you think about the reverse engineering, one of the things that we do is actually take the current valuation and the forward valuation so that we can have a sense for what it is that we're really going after and how important that is to the individual. And a lot of times it's really that what motivates somebody is kind of understanding what that forward value is too. So not just today, but also thinking about, if you were to grow and succeed, what that forward value could be too, and what that would mean for, yourself, your employees, your investors, potentially family, etc.
Yeah. Well, I know you mentioned you guys handle kind of 2 types of liquidity events. One, 100% liquidity or moving towards 100% liquidity, a major stake. And the second being just kind of taking some chips off the table. You threw out, selling 30% to get some capital liquid personally, as well as reinvestment in the business. What would motivate someone to do that second option? Why would someone want to sell off a minority stake, and how would that help them eventually reach their major goals?
Yeah, so there's really 3 core reasons why they would want to do it. Number one, they are desiring some level of personal financial flexibility, but not wanting to sell the company. And so a lot of times in those, what we call them like minority recapitalizations, or basically just selling something less than 50% of your business. Number one, they're going to want to see a little bit of personal liquidity. And this is kind of common. I mean, a lot of times people put 20 years into their business and they put a lot of financial resources back into it. And so getting something back out, but without selling, can be a number one driving motivation. Number 2, they want to have the opportunity to grow the business, but again, not wanting to use their own capital. And so if you think about taking some money out and putting some money on balance sheet of the business, you're getting a bit of a double whammy. Okay. So you're not only getting some capital back out of the business, you're also not putting money back in order to grow it. So a transaction that provides both opportunities can be, of interest to a lot of people. And then lastly is you're typically going to get a partner who's been there and done that, who can kind of show you the ropes a little bit. And in the theater system of the capital markets, will actually be a credential to maybe when it comes time to sell the business, ultimately will be a credential on that part of the journey. And so personal liquidity, personal and balance sheet benefits, and then lastly is having a partner who's maybe been there, done that. And again, not without giving up control.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, I know you mentioned just a moment ago, you guys put out a quarterly report with some great resources in it. I know you're a multi-time best-selling author. You have a book coming out, either just came out or is coming out very soon. If someone wants to take advantage of the resources that you have available, or if someone is interested is coming on board with you as a client, what's going to be the best way to get a hold of those resources or get in touch with you?
Well, we welcome all the above, and we are really happy to provide a lot of data and industry information that's available through our website, so westlakesecurities.com. Our LinkedIn profile, which we're pretty easy to find, both Westlake Securities and Matt Andersen, Andersen spelled with an E at the end. The 2 books that I have, Completing the Deal and Intentional Growth, are available on Amazon. Completing the Deal is a great resource for those who want to learn more about transaction activities and what transactions look like, preparing for a transaction, what may be involved after a transaction. It's a great resource for that. Intentional Growth, which is available for pre-order and will come out October 20th. Another great resource for those that want to grow and scale businesses of all different sizes. I think this is a great resource for anyone who's got a business from $1 million in revenue to $1 billion in revenue. I think if you want to grow intentionally, this is going to be a great resource for a much wider audience of potential business owners out there. And we give back a lot. The books have been a major give back for me. If you've studied anything about author royalties, you'll quickly realize that there's not a lot of ways to get wealthy writing a business book in particular. So for us, this is a bit of a way to kind of get more information in the hands of business owners and really to provide a give back. I also give a number of talks, master classes. We have a workshop. Our next workshop is coming up towards the end of June, where you're actually going to be able to hear from, it's a very low cost way to hear from people who are actually in the trenches doing this every day and can take your business and apply real life strategies and tactics to help you get from where you are to where you want to be. And so those are all great ways to reach out and to get involved with what we're doing. But we give back a lot, whether it's free data, whether it's low cost books and low cost content or free content, or low cost workshops. We're doing an event at the University of Georgia next week. We've got an afternoon planned with some great speakers. The admission for that event is very low because it's in partnership with the University of Georgia. It's going to be a $50 admission. So we've got kind of elements that can range from free content all the way to our full-on consulting services, advisory services, and everywhere in between for kind of almost any budget. But we really feel like after 27 years personally and 23 years of personal and business success, we want to give back to the business community. And so we've got some piece of content or some piece of advice that can be given across any budget.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate that as a business owner. And yeah, I know that content that can be very beneficial. So from all of us small business owners, thank you. And I'll make sure we get all those links in the show notes here, your LinkedIn profile, westlakesecurities.com, and a link to those books on Amazon so our listeners can just hit the show notes and click on those links to get right to you. So
awesome. And I'm really excited about intentional growth. We've gotten quotes and feedback from Salvatore Ferragamo Jr., who's the CEO of El Boro Winery, which is the Ferragamo family winery. Charlie Amato, who's one of the owners of the San Antonio Spurs and chairman of SWBC. Abby Malott, who's president and publisher for the Austin Business Journal. I mean, I could keep going, but we've had a number of just really, I'm almost like honored as to the quotes we've gotten back from these industry leaders that are in support of the book, because it's really kind of meant to provide an unlock and a proven guide and framework for those that are on this business journey with us to have a better path to growth. And so it's, again, just been an honor to see some of the comments that we've gotten back and quotes I've gotten back from business leaders that have kind of been there and done that have viewed the book and said, hey, there's something here.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. Well, this next question is a question I ask of every guest. Are you a person of a particular faith tradition? And if so, how has that affected your business journey and your leadership?
Yeah, so happy to share. So I am definitely a believer in Christ. I believe He is my Lord and Savior. And so along the way, that I think part of that is kind of keeping an open mind. So we've had folks of all different kind of religious beliefs, and big believer that people can and should see you coming long before you get there in terms of your works, deeds, and activities. And that's kind of where we really focus from a day-to-day business perspective, is leading through example. But when you think about our company in terms of advising the way we'd want to be advised, being a relationship first firm, being focused on outcomes and delivering results, toughing it out when it needs to be toughed out, all those things I think are kind of deeply rooted in some of what I think are core tenets of my belief system. But it's something that's been very important to me. I've been and none of us is perfect, and been a better practitioner over at some days and years versus others. But if at the end of the day, those are things that really matter to me. And I think they shine through in the sense of we don't really go out there. We're not very public. In fact, this is one of the few public pieces where you'll hear me actually say that, but you asked the question, so I'm going to answer it. So we hope that what we do is able to be seen through our work product and how we interact with people, and that they would understand that long before we answered the question in terms of seeing kind of our good deeds, so to speak. We're big believers in giving back. We raised several $100,000 this year to help a homelessness organization. We've helped all sorts of organizations over the last kind of decade, and it's a really important part to what we do in terms of our purpose statement being delivering value that changes lives. And so when you think about the companies we work with, we've had some fantastic outcomes. Our folks that work in our organization have had some wonderful personal outcomes with their time with us at Westlake, all the way through our community in terms of give back. And that whole cycle, I think, is kind of reflective of a core belief system that's important to myself and probably a lot of folks in our organization.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your openness and vulnerability there. I appreciate that. I know early on, we talked about podcasts. We talked about going to the discount bookstore and getting books. You've talked about mentors, and we had a discussion about coaching. What have been the best resources to grow you as a leader?
So another great question. I think a couple of things I would really point to. I've been a ferocious reader. I've consumed thousands of books throughout my adult life. I've been a ferocious journaler, which means accountability to outcomes in my mind. And then and not just business wise, personal. I've got things that I've kind of written down and I track over time, and I really try to hold myself accountable. And that's in all aspects of life. And again, not every day is perfect. Not every month's perfect. Every year is perfect. But I do think that those are two core areas that are hugely helpful. I also really do prioritize. Look, there's times I unplug and unwind this, that, and the other. But if you're on this business journey, I think the sacrifices that we go through, it's important to continue to personally develop along the way, because in the end, that's what makes them all worthwhile. Because as we create more value in ourselves, that's going to translate to our business. We're going to bring more value to our stakeholders, like our employees, et cetera, even our customers, vendors, suppliers. And so that self-education is really important. I've gotten more into, podcast, Audible. I've kind of gone back and forth with over time, but I really like podcasts. I'll listen to great, I think this is a great podcast, man. You've been there and done it, right? You're bringing people that have been there and done it to your audience. And so this is a type of podcast that I would listen to. Is I want to hear from somebody who's actually been in the trenches on a particular topic that I have interest in, and I want to get that knowledge as best as I can. But I would say first and foremost, books. Secondly, journal and accountability to outcomes, personally and professionally. And then lastly is probably consuming podcast content from people that have been there and done that.
Oh, man. Well, that's a great way to wrap it up. I think just speaking with you, the time that we have, I think we share a lot of similar values. And I could ask questions all afternoon, but I know we're kind of up against the time limit because, again, you outlined the 3 types of mentorship or the 3 types of coaches. And you fit into that third category. You're somebody that's getting it done, doing it, and you've got a meeting to close a big deal this afternoon. So we want to honor your time and make sure we get you to that on time. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your wisdom and your knowledge. Like I said, we'll get those links in the show notes so our listeners can get in touch with you or at least get a hold of your resources. I really do appreciate the time. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And as a quick reminder, Intentional Growth's available on Amazon for pre-order. Check out Westlake Securities. I really appreciate the time we got to spend together this afternoon. Thank you.
This has been fantastic. And thank you guys for joining us here on From the Ground Up Show. Again, help me out. Like, share, follow, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, on YouTube, or on social media. Take a moment, send this episode to a friend, recommend it to somebody that you know. We really need your guys' help to get the content out there. Make sure you check out our merch store. That is shop.fromthegroundupshow.com. And until next time, keep grinding.